If I mention the word caregiving, what comes to mind? To a lot of people, they think, well, it means making sure that my older mom or dad are safe. Are they healthy? Did they take their medicine? Did they make their appointment? Do we have to have someone to come into their home and look after them or find a facility for them? Yeah, all of those things. And that is tough. It's difficult. It's emotional. It's stressful. It's expensive as all get out. But usually we don't combine the word financial and caregiving. We think of money and finances as something that happens sadly after the fact, after mom and dad had passed, and hopefully they had a will. What are we going to do with the house? What happens to the accounts or benefits? And just sorting it all out for yourself, if you're an only child, or with siblings. And that can be an utter train wreck. But the truth is, there's a lot in between mom or dad needing day-to-day care and the time they pass that has a lot to do with money. What if they become incapacitated? What if they get dementia? What if they just can't take care of it anymore? And we're not talking about managing investments or trust. We're talking about who's going to pay their monthly bills, who's going to make sure that the insurance is renewed, that things get paid, that things are done, that things are taken care of when they can't anymore. The difficult and ugly truth is caregiving is also about money. That's what we're going to talk about today on the Advanced Adulting Podcast. My guest is David Russell. David's a wealth manager, a financial advisor. But it wasn't until he experienced this in his own life with his parents. Here's a man that's financially literate, and he realized there's so much of the day-to-day things that need to happen. He thought, if I'm well versed in this and I'm still learning things, how's the average person who really has no background in this, how are they going to deal with it all? The big stuff and the small. And this is important. We're not talking about things that you have to have a ton of money. We're talking about the day-to-day small activities. That's when he decided to become an educator. David created the Financial Caregiver Academy. Teaches people, everyday people from all walks of life, about the things that they need to know to get ahead of the situation, to make it easier on themselves, on their parents, and their families. David's from the South, and he's a little old school, and I love that. And we talk about the idea of honor, of taking care of your parents is not only helpful to you, but it's a way of honoring them. One thing I love about him and the work that he does is it's not just about making sure that things are done, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, but it's also about keeping the family intact. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with David Russell, founder of Wealth and Honor and the Financial Caregiver Academy. I'm Bradley Richardson, and this is Advanced Adulting. David Russell, welcome to Advanced Adulting. So we've talked for a while about a lot of interesting things involving families, money, life, caregiving. And I think one of the interesting things is it affects everybody. It affects every single one of us. It doesn't matter where in the world you live, your background, your income, or anything. This taking care of somebody, it really is truly a global, I say phenomenon, but it's a global thing that impacts us all, isn't it?
Well, here's what I tell people. If we live long enough, and we hope we all do, but if we live long enough, we will either be the recipients of care or we will die on the way. And I hate to make it that morbid, but that's just the fact. And so if that's true for us, it's also true of our aging parents. I mean, their life expectancies have been extended as well. Mm-hmm. And the 21st century is the year of outsourcing. And so whereas care used to be provided as a given in the home, now it's just outsourced to somebody with a W-2 and a paper and a clipboard. So yeah, we're going to face it one way or the other, both as recipients and as givers.
Yeah, we don't think about that. It's funny in a lot of the work that I do in advanced adulting, but with careers and recruiting and things like that, we talk a lot about ageism, and the ageism comes from largely people think, oh, well, they're old. Well, guess what? You're going to be old. It's happening. And suddenly a lot of us are there. And it's the same thing with caregiving too. We don't think about it. And we either take it for granted or don't think about it. I think that's a big piece right there.
Yeah, I think, I've been doing financial planning now for 40 something years. And I think our industry has done a great job of preparing people for two big milestones, retirement and death. And we've not done a great job of addressing the in-between, short of maybe just selling long-term care insurance. It's addressing all of those other questions. Well, where do I even want to be cared for? I mean, and we guys are the worst in the world about, being in denial. I mean, I can't tell you, I live in the South. So I can't tell you how many guys I talk to that will say, I'm not going to any institution. I'm not going to be cared for. I'm going to drop dead on the golf course. I'm going to drop dead in the tree stand or on my
Right.
tractor, fill in the blank, anywhere
Right.
but in a facility. And I've got to do some really come to Jesus, types of meetings and say, hey, let me tell you how it's probably going to go. And, that scenario is not something that we like to talk about.
We don't like to think about it for ourselves. And I say as a child, but as an adult child in your face, you sure as hell don't think about it. You're not going to sit there and think, oh, well, in the back of your mind that we're going to have to do something about mom or dad. It's coming. Whether it is a facility, whether it's at home, whether it's, some sort of medical care, but you kind of kick that can down the road a lot, don't you?
It's two reasons. Number one, our aging parents typically don't like to talk about it because they come from a generation where money is private. Talking
Mm-hmm.
about money is a taboo. And God, you'd almost rather talk to your parents about their sex life than their finances. It's just one of those things that you think is off limits. And so we all tend to just deal with it when it comes.
Mm-hmm.
I'll cross that bridge when it gets here. Well, guess what? It's here for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people. And it takes just one fall, one stroke, one incident that all of a sudden makes it happen.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people, and I thought this as well. You think, well, we've got a will, we're good. I mean, okay, you're that. Yes, that's good, but that's scratching the surface. It's so much more layered and deep than just having a will and all these other things you have to think about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd say the legal industry, when they can get people to do it, and my industry as well, has done a decent job of saying, let's get all the legal documents done. So they get them done. Maybe they've got copies sitting in the house somewhere. Maybe they put them in a safety deposit box, which is the worst place to keep them. Or maybe
Mm-hmm.
they just keep them at the lawyer's office. But they've done the de minimis, the legal job, but they've never sat down with the adult kids to have what I call the who does what when meeting, which is to say, all right, now we've got this. We do have a plan, which is better than 70% of the rest of Americans. So we've got a plan. Now here's what it does when something happens. You know,
Mm-hmm.
a will just takes effect when they're already dead. You know, there's got all this in between time that could be 15, 20, 25 years where there's a lot of decisions that have to be done have to be made rather. And those legal documents might address that. But then what if the siblings have no clue who's going to be in that role? So, you know, having those discussions early on is key. Facing the realities, not only in our own life, but in our parents' life of that is coming. And it's not likely that both are going to pass away before they're in some need of care.
Well, I love how you say that it is the in between, and I think that people tend to think in absolutes. They either think of when they think of this, they think of caregiving. They're thinking in it's either that, like you say, it's the end of life, they're dead, and what do we do on basically sorting out and cleaning things up? So it's finite there. Or in their actual caregiving piece is they think it means tasks. It means the day to day tactical task things of getting a caregiver, getting someone to come in and look for mom, making sure they take their meds, all of that data, which is critical. It's important. But one of the things I love about what you do is look, it's a lot more than just the day to day traditional caregiving. Caregiving is about money. And you said
Yeah.
nobody likes to think about that, talk about that. It's ugly. It sounds dirty. It's uncomfortable. But you've really kind of created this area or brought light to the area of this financial caregiving.
Yeah, I mean, caregiving does encompass a lot of different aspects. And by don't mean to minimize the physical aspects of that and the emotional toll it takes when you're actually doing the physical work, when you're there bathing mom or dad, when you're having to take care of doctor's appointments and you are administering meds and you're getting the calls or you're having to be the one changing, making sure caregivers are there. Those are emotionally and physically taxing jobs. But the financial caregiving piece I found is something that seems to be not as addressed as much in a lot of the resources that are available. What does it mean to be responsible for another person's money while they're still living, both during a time whether they've got full loss of capacity or partial, or whether you're doing just a little bit or you're doing everything? That's an area that most people are not very well prepared for, even if their parents as I said earlier, have done the right legal arrangements, well, that's just half the job.
Hmm.
It'd be like being hired and saying, well, I don't know if you're qualified or not, but we've got a job description. Doesn't mean much if you don't have the training for it.
Right. Well, it's we think again we talk about the finite piece of it, but you're I mean if somebody somebody's incapacitated, I mean that can last years. That can drain your money fast, and we don't think about that because if someone loses control, if they're incapacitated or get dementia or something like that, someone has to step in, and that's a big process right there that we don't really think about until it hits you in the face.
Well, let me give a personal story here because people may think, well, this guy's a financial planner. He must, he's got it all together. This was not something that has happened to him. He's never stood in my shoes before. He does this for other people. Well, let me tell you kind of just a personal story. So my mom and dad, my real dad passed away when I was only 8 years old. So my mom was widowed at 39 years old and didn't even know how to write a check. So I was essentially raised by a widow, and I saw the vulnerability that a widow had, especially if they weren't the family treasurer, if they didn't have a career outside the home, if they didn't know a lot about the finances, how vulnerable that put them in. So, but then mom remarried when I was 18 to a wonderful guy, have no problems, just referring to him as dad because he essentially became surrogate dad in a way. And they were happily, he was also widowed. He still took care of the money, took care of the finances. He was as good of as an investor as anybody I'd ever known. Never needed my help, thank you, because he was doing well enough on his own. Around I guess this was probably early thousands, maybe mid 2000s. Mom went to him and said, look, I've been through this once. I'm not going through it again. I don't know anything about what we've got. So I want you to sit down with David and talk to him about, where things are. Who do I call? Who
Hmm.
does what when? That was hard for him because he was old school. He came from that thought of that this is my business, it's personal, it's private. I'm perfectly fine. I don't want to face the fact that I may be slipping. And he was close to 80 at this time. Well, long story short, they moved closer to us because they were living in Texas at the time, 500 miles away from family.
Hmm.
They saw the writing on the wall, or at least mom did, and said, we're going to move closer to family because if something happens, I don't want to be 500 miles away. They came closer and I began assisting, quotes, air quotes here, assisting with their finances, helping them get organized and everything. And I knew the year that I was helping them with their taxes, and dad looked at me when I asked for his Charles Schwab tax forms. And he looked at me with every bit of seriousness and said, who is Charles Schwab? And at that moment, I knew it was time to step in. And I frankly thought I was ready. I had the professional training, I'd done this and that, but I wasn't ready to step into their shoes to do all the other things about financial caregiving that you don't think about. That, whether it's ordering the spare parts over the internet for computers or TVs, or
Right.
whether it's changing the direct deposits for Social Security, or dealing with the minutia, selecting Medicare plans, renewing those every year, making sure that taxes were filed on time. Now, there's a lot of things that I had not stepped into before, not to mention just the emotional part of stepping in as a sibling and wondering if you're always looking over your shoulder. Thankfully, I've got great relationships with my brother and sister, but there's still that accountability feeling and that notion that, well, what if I do something wrong? So there's all of that comes with it that you're just not prepared for.
Well, and I think that's so important you say that. And that's really what, when you and I first started talking, this idea of what financial caregiving is, because it is, it's easy to think, and everybody's marketing something, seems like, it's it's a financial planner. That means investments, and that means what to do with the Schwab account or the 401 or rolling over retirement and such. Yeah, it is, but it is the day-to-day things that are so equally as important of just paying bills. You say whether it's insurance, and one of my favorite phrases, and it applies to everything, and certainly this is, you don't know what you don't know. You have
That's
no
right.
idea sometimes what you're doing, but definitely what someone else is going on and what they have going on in their life financially, personally what they need. And hey, money is a great lubricant here. I mean, that's what makes life go on. And when you are seeing that with your parents or a loved one, and you have to step in, yeah, it's not just, oh, managing the big money. It's the how do you get such and such paid? Hey, who pays the yard guy? Who does this? How
Right.
do you handle
Yep.
insurance? And when you let it slip, that's a problem.
It's the day to day. And that's why I started, wealthandhonor.com as an educational piece. Cause what I do professionally and do, day to day in a lot of my career is not going to be utilized by a lot of the people that I'm trying to reach out to. And it's not meant to. So this is I started it to be help people who were in families who are in these age transitions, as I call them, help them to be better prepared, to know what landmines to look for, to know where the gotchas are, and also to let them know, what do I need to know? I mean, if I just see this on the horizon, if mom and dad are doing fine now, but I'm worried because I know it's coming. How do I even broach the conversation? How do I even start it without feeling like I'm really stepping into an area that's none of my business? So that's why I started Wealth and Honor, was to be able to address that in a way that the adult child could begin to be in a position where the parent trusts them because they see them coming from a position of wanting to honor their parents. And there, we could open up a whole new discussion about what, honor, and kind of go down that rabbit trail, but because it's a misunderstood word, I think.
Hmm.
But that was the goal, to try to help people, hopefully before they are in that crisis point, have those discussions and know what they, at least be aware of what they don't know, and begin to educate themselves.
I want to talk in a moment about what people do need to know and what some of those landmines are. But first, you mentioned, how do you broach this conversation? I mean, it's fraught with tension, emotion, not only with your parent, with you, with maybe you might be doing this for an in-law, it's with your siblings. What do you suggest? What are some of the first things to do, or how do you handle this conversation and bring it up?
Well, and I in my first book that I wrote in 2012, which was on what you need to know, the adult child's guide to becoming an effective financial caregiver. And that was my first foray into this, because it was right after I stepped into those shoes. I offer 7 kind of conversation starters. But before that, back up a little bit and ask yourself, do I already have the relationship with my parents such that I'm the best person to even bring up the topic? And don't feel bad if you're not. It might not be you. It might be that you just need to. And I also discuss what I call uh, how much you need to know kind of depends on what I call the continuum of dependence of where your parents are. And if they are currently independent, you may just need to know that, hey, there's a plan. We're not going to divulge what it is, but we do have one,
Right.
or maybe who their advisor team is. And then you can gradually begin to gain trust if it's not there already. If you already are there, or if there are already signs, then there are some conversation starters that can help break the ice. And so much of it, you're right, Bradley, it depends on, I mean, every parent is different. Your parents may be, I'm cut to the chase. Don't monkey around with me. I can see that you're just kind of BSing me, trying to get
Right.
into the door. So just state it up front. Mom and dad, y'all are getting older and you're not as sharp as you used to be. And frankly, I'm worried about who's going to step in should you no longer be able to make decisions for yourself. Can we have that talk? Maybe sometimes the direct approach works. If that, it could be though that, you bring up money and dad's liking to slam the door in your face.
Oh
So,
yeah.
another way to build that trust, if dad's still, or mom or dad are still totally independent, is, one of the best ways, ask mom or dad for advice on your own planning. Tell them, ask dad, dad, I'm doing my will. Who's your lawyer?
Kind of
Because if you don't
backdoor.
have a will, you asking for have to get involved in theirs is kind of, it's a little bit like, well, you hadn't done your stuff yet. So do your own homework before you go try to get into somebody else's. So ask dad for advice. Or if you're thinking about, investing your 401k plan, and dad's been like in my case, he's been an astute investor for years. He knows how to do this stuff. Ask his advice. You don't have to take it, but just asking for it will build that trust wall, and he may be more willing to let down when it's time for you to be a little bit more inquisitive.
I love that. That's such a great way of going into that because I know in all the other aspects of dealing with an older parent or caregiver, I mean, look, they're independent and they probably know and they may see the decline, but they don't want to admit it. Okay. I know that was the case with my mom. And the fact is, sometimes you're gonna have to parent the parent. You know, a lot of us don't have the tact to go in with that. So you come in like a bull of, well, you need to do this and you need to do this, or what about, and obviously someone's going to go on the defensive with this instead of just actually treating them because I think we we fail to understand that sometimes they're scared too. They're scared about this whole thing. And it's just
Yeah.
another way that puts in their face of, hey, I'm mortal. I'm running out of runway here. And so I love that approach. That's great.
And we also tend to, we can either respond in two ways ourselves, and siblings will sometimes balance each other out this way. Sometimes we are in denial ourselves that mom and dad are reaching this point in their life of perhaps dependency, or we overestimate certain things. Mom can't remember what she had for lunch yesterday, so she's got to have Alzheimer's. You know, we jump to a conclusion, and so we think things are worse than they are. And so you've got to understand and make a realistic assessment of really where things are and building that bridge early enough to where you're not having to respond in crisis mode
Mm-hmm.
is
The
key. Now
crisis
there's
mode is
other,
the one.
you know, there's other things, you can do to I kind of like, watch a movie that deals with the topic, but preferably a funny one, not an overly serious one. Preferably
Right.
one that's a little funny, maybe a little irreverent, where y'all can laugh and
Right.
talk about it, or maybe one that that probes them to thinking or sees themselves maybe in some of the characters. Just be careful that you're not using it as a preachy kind of thing. You're just doing it.
It's like
It
they
needs to
taught
be
sex
real
ed in
subtle.
junior high here of luring them into it. No,
Yes,
that never
exactly.
worked. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Let's talk about, okay, great conversation with your parent, but siblings, that is as emotionally charged because, look, as a parent of three kids, they're all three as different as can be. Everybody's got different personalities, different ways of approaching things. And it's only taken me 50 some odd years to figure this out, but my sister's younger than me. You each had different experiences growing up. You may view your parents very differently than the other person. So what are some ways to have this conversation with your siblings, and whether you're the one taking the lead or not, how do you handle that?
Man, and this is one where I wish I could speak. Well, I'm glad I can't speak more from experience, rather, because, like I said, thankfully, I'm the youngest of three by a decade and have tremendous respect for my older brother and sister. They have done an equal amount, if not more, of the work in caregiving for mom now that she is widowed, than I have, having moved away somewhat. But they also respect my role as the financial caregiver. So we've had that. But I'll also say this: there is no such thing as a functional family. Everybody's
Right.
going to have
Yeah.
some level of dysfunction in it. And I've seen firsthand, either through clients or through other extended family situations, where those relationships have not been ideal. And you have to go in, I think, as much as possible, separating, and you've almost got to make the discussions around a parent's care so cerebral and so separated from the emotional baggage of the past
Mm-hmm.
that, especially where there is that dynamic of either mistrust or one where there's been some separation, withdrawal from one or the other, it's got to be focus and stay with the facts. I'm not saying that there may not be time for family therapy. I'm just saying that having it when you're trying to figure out what is the best source and level of care for mom and dad is not the time for it. It's not the platform for it. I've conducted many meetings with families where we're going to be talking about what I call the who does what when. And I say at the front end, this is not a therapy session. This is not for you where we vent past grievances. I lay the rules. And the rules are, we're going to focus on what's going to be done for mom and dad's care and who's in the best position to be able to do parts of it, and
Mm-hmm.
who can do what, whether it's time, talents, or resources, who can do that. So it's important to make that very focus on the facts, news, weather, sports, and leave the other stuff for another discussion if it needs to happen. And sometimes it doesn't.
Right. And you are 100% on target. There is no functional family. The Cleavers were on TV, and that's fake. No one exists like that. What I find often is sometimes there's one sibling that just wants nothing to do with it. I mean, there's some that say, hey, you know what? I don't want to be involved, but I'll cut a check. Okay, fine. And then there are some that just, they check out. They check out. And the frustration I see is in the sibling or siblings that they become upset because that person won't engage. They won't be involved. They don't participate. And I just see people beating their head against the wall. And sometimes they're just not going to. And you have to, yeah,
That's
you're gonna have to
right.
pick up the slack. You're gonna have to deal with it.
It is a exercise in frustration if you think you can change someone. You
Right.
you're probably not going to guilt or shame someone into changing their behavior. And so this is where, and it's hard. Listen, this, I'm not sugarcoating it. I'm not trying to, to make like, okay, here's all you got to do. Take these 3 steps and boom, you're good. It's hard. You're not going to guilt or shame someone into being something that they weren't already. And you're right. And so much of the time, the burden of care falls on, generally speaking, the oldest daughter in the family, or usually the first daughter in the family, if the rest are sons, because the sons tend to think, well, you're better with mom, you take care of her, just let us know what you need. That's kind of like asking someone who's recently widowed or had a death in the family, let me know what I can do. Well, you're not going to get a call, right? You got to step up and do what you can do if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to be that person. And so I think that's where deciding who you are and how you want to show up for that person under your care has got to be the thing that motivates you. Not, well, I'm going to do this and that so that my sibling is going to see how hard I'm working, how much I'm sacrificing, how much of a martyr and a victim I'm becoming so that
Mm-hmm.
they'll step up to the plate, because they're not going to do it.
No,
And if they
no.
do it, they're only going to do it because you've aggravated them enough to do it. And then it's not going to really resolve any kind of rift. Now, if you can approach it from a standpoint of, hey, mom needs to go to the doctor next week. I'm going to be out of town. Can you take mom to the doctor on Tuesday at 10 a.m.?
Mm-hmm.
You're just,
Right.
all you're doing is asking a question, staying with the facts, not like, I'm exhausted. I'm tired of taking mom to the doctor. I've done it the last 4 times.
Right.
Can't you do it?
Yeah. And just not be and if the answer is no or they don't, just all I think the thing that I've heard, and it's simple with anything in life. You can only control you. You can control how you respond, you can control your actions, you can control what you do and bring to the table, but you cannot control how someone else, whether it's an outsider or whether it's a family member, responds and reacts to this. And you hope they would. You can give them the opportunity to, but ultimately it's all on you to handle you and your business in this situation.
Yeah, I think it was Viktor Frankl who said that in between stimulus and response is this period of time where we get to decide how we're going to be. And every decision that we make in that pause is a vote, and I'm paraphrasing the author of Atomic Habits here, is a vote for the kind of person you want to be.
Hey, we'll get back to the conversation in just a second. But first, I want to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Wealth and Honor, creators of the Financial Caregiver Academy. Let's talk about your parents for a second. This might sting a little bit. Caring for your aging parents or an older loved one is tough, any way you slice it. There's a lot to consider. But being a caregiver isn't just about taking them to doctor's visits or making sure they take their meds or figuring out where they're going to live. Oftentimes, it's about money and who's going to control it. The reality is, things can get emotional and ugly very fast. Got siblings, everybody's got an opinion. You've got insurance forms that nobody knows how to decipher or what they mean. You've got bills piling up, legal issues that you never thought you'd ever have to deal with. You don't know what you don't know. But one thing you do know is that you need an education. You need a crash course on understanding all of this. And that's where Wealth and Honor comes in. They've created a program, a course that does just that. It's called the Financial Caregiver Academy, and it teaches you everything you need to know about the money side of caregiving. They operate on what they call the 4 Ps: people, property, programs, and plans. And they show you how to do it, how to navigate it, what to ask and how to take care of your family without blowing up your family in the process. Whether you're caring for an aging parent now or whether you know you're going to in the future, you don't want to get caught off guard. Contact wealthandhonor.com and check out the Financial Caregiver Academy. Use code Bradley25 to save some and get started now. Check it out. Let's get back to the conversation.
If you can separate out what anybody else is doing from, well, okay, well, then, but who do I want to be? Do I want to be a person that I wouldn't want to depend on if I were in a similar situation as my parent? And that then needs to be that anchor, that moral anchor, the scaffolding that you attach to, rather than obligation, guilt, shame, or anything like that, which will quickly drain your emotional battery.
Well, we've talked about honor, and obviously it's the name of your company, Wealth and Honor, in that project there. But I see people in this situation that we call them the reluctant caregiver. No one plans for this. No one sets up, no one intends to find themselves in a situation. Where I say the honor piece comes in, and where it's hard is someone who had a difficult or tumultuous relationship with their parent. Perhaps it was just rough growing up, and they're thinking that guy was an SOB, to me for however many years. I'll be damned if I'm going to take care of them now. And I see that it's more common than you think. And especially probably with this generation. And we throw the word trauma and all that out there. Some of it is truly legitimate. Some of it is just, you need a therapist to get beyond some things. But again, at some point, you're going to be the one that's old. And just as you mentioned, more importantly, what type of person do you want to be? Stepping up, it may be about them, but really it's about you and who do you want to be and how do you want to show up as a man or a woman right now in this situation?
Yeah, and I don't want to also minimize the real trauma. If you came from an abusive, whether it's physical, mental, sexual abuse, I mean, that's real. And the key there is not for you to necessarily be put on this idea of honor. The key is to get some healing. And so this is the nudge for any listeners who've gone through that, to get that from a professional source, because that is important. Once you've either gained some tools to deal with that and move beyond it, or let's just say you're an average person who had, my parents weren't perfect. Yeah, they made some mistakes, but what am I going to do in terms of, and how do I respond as an honorable person? For one thing, this word honor, and I realized after I named my blog and my site Wealth and Honor, I didn't really have an idea as to what honor meant. I didn't have a good definition. It's kind of like an archaic word. It kind of goes along with swords and, armor and, knights, and you think of duels or something, right. Or you throw back, if you had a religious upbringing, all you can remember are sermons where it says, honor your mom and your dad so it may go well with you in the land in which the Lord your God has given you. Whether you grew up Jewish or Christian, you had that verse hammered into your brain. And I too used it. Man, I need to go to my kids and apologize because, I kind of raised them under a kind of a stricter standard and belief system than where I'm at now. And I so used that as a weaponized version of what honor was supposed to be, which was a one-sided, honor me or else kind of thing. And so we've got to reestablish and reclaim this whole concept of honor as more of an internal virtue that we have decided is a framework for who we want to be, not just in situations regarding our parents. Who do we want to be in our relationships? Who do we want to be in our work life? Who do we want to be with our friends? It's really because a position of honor. And the reason honor is separate from like love is because love fluctuates. Love gets tired. Love is going to be drained. You're not going to wake up every day just saying, oh, I love to go changing mom's diaper. I love going into the dad's room and seeing that he's put shit all over the walls again. That's not love, right. But honor says, I'm going to respect this person as a human being and give them dignity, even if they can't remember who they were or who I am. And so honor then becomes this internal virtue that we have rehearsed and practiced over and over again until it becomes us. And so there's a lot more that I could say about that.
I love it.
But we've got to then reclaim this idea of honor, because it's not always pleasant. And even if you were raised with parents who sacrificed for you and gave to you and gave you every opportunity, there's going to be times when caregiving doesn't feel good and you're not going to just love it. And emotions are going to come and go and ebb and flow. And what is it that you turn to then to help you show up, even when you're tired, at 2 o'clock in the morning with a fresh change of sheets to redo mom's bed because she's wet the bed? You know, what's going to make you do that? It may not always be love, but it can be honor.
Right. It's interesting. I do a lot of work with folks all around the world, and we've talked to a lot of folks about family and aging in different cultures. And it's interesting how this idea of honor that you're talking about, of having, this, we call it the sandwich generation now, but we think of it as this pressure. You're being squeezed in the middle, but other cultures, it's very common to have not only your children, but also the elderly parents and grandparents living with someone, or at least in proximity to. And that caregiving is just kind of a way of life. It's just expected and done. And it seems that in America, at least for this past generation, this Gen X, or past, several decades, we've gotten away from that. And part of that is probably with distributed families and moving and all being scattered all throughout. Mom, grandma doesn't live across town anymore. She lives, across the country. And I also think it's this idea of having the, for lack of a better word, almost disposable nature of things. And you mentioned it early on in this conversation. We outsource things. So rather than us doing it, it's easier just to, there used to be the dark humor of, oh, send mom to a home. Oh, put me in a good home. It's tough though. And we've seen a lot of the horrors. We've seen a lot of the things out there. And with more people aging at home, double-edged sword. That family dynamic is coming closer again. So it's tough, but it's good getting to spend time. But it's also such a difficult thing to deal with the tasks, the financial concerns, all of these things as well. And I love how you mentioned with honor, it's internal. That's transportable. That goes with you. It's not situational.
Yeah, I mean, if you go through and you look through the tapestry of history where honor was first a sacred edict, and it doesn't matter if you go to Babylonia with Hammurabi's code, if you go to ancient Egypt, where honoring parents was seen as something that rewarded you in the afterlife, if you were raised Jewish, if you were raised Confucianism and Asian philosophy, Buddhism, all of the world's great wisdom traditions have a similar sacred doctrine around the honor of parents, and a lot of it was rooted in societal stability. Because if you had order within families, you had order within tribes, you had order within society at large, and so it kind of emanated from that. As sacred edict became civil law, then it became codified that you had certain obligations towards your family, towards aging parents, and you could be punished under civil law if you didn't abide by some of those rules. At least it wasn't as severe as some of the older ones. I mean, ancient Jewish law, for example, if you cursed your parents, I mean, you were dragged outside the city gates and had some serious neighbor feedback that involved rocks. And if you were in Babylonia, if you struck your dad, then the penalty was amputation. So we had some pretty, those then evolved into civic law that wound their way through, either into common law, into English common law, into, Roman common law that eventually made its way to the States. Asia developed filial piety laws, which were crucial to and central to their governing structures. And even today, both Singapore and certain parts of China have filial piety laws on the books that can punish kids if they don't visit their parents enough. So it's sort of like court-ordered guilt trips. But my my point is, all of those external things can't make you honorable. They can force behavior. It's kind of like you used to say, well, I'm to your parents when they tell you to sit down. Well, I may be sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside.
Yeah.
So
go to Disney World and you see everybody, you're going to smile. You're going to have a good time. You're going to like it. Okay.
That's right. So honor as we have it now, and it doesn't matter if you outsource care. I mean, as long as it is done from a position of I'm honoring mom and dad's dignity the best way I can. And the best way I can is to have them cared for by someone or some place that can do it better than I can. The outsourcing itself does not necessarily is not a good or bad thing. It's the motivation behind it. And I think that's where, as you said, and as I said earlier, it's the internal engine. It's the internal fire that is the reason why you do what you do.
One of the things that I love about what you do, besides just giving out great info, and we're going to talk about some nuts and bolts things in a moment, but in this world now where we do think of it as just performative, this is such a personal, such an emotional thing that we're dealing with our parents as they get older and dealing with our own lives. I just love how you really bring it back to this, because it is about family. It is about the people you love. You know, you're not a hired gun. You're not getting a 1099 or a W-2 for this. You're stepping up because it's someone who plays or has played an important part in your life. And I love that. We talk about wealth and honor, and we talk about what you do as is really an education. That's it. It's a caregiving financial education more than anything. What are some of the things that people need to know immediately? What are some of the landmines that people can step into that they really don't think about right out of the gate?
So let's just talk about some of the ones that could be really kind of big gotchas, the ones that can really create not only division within a family and relationships, but also can create significant costs or do significant damage. And I'll give you an example. Involved right now with a family where dad died about 3 years ago, and son was appointed as his executor and then also as the trustee of the trust that formed out of dad's estate. Now, no formal training, didn't know, but you could say, well, wasn't it great that he stepped up and agreed to do that? Well, dad was the one who named son in the will initially. But that, as I said earlier, you can have the legal documents, but if there's no preparation and if there's no awareness among the siblings of, I've asked so-and-so to be in this role, here's why, here's what they do, here's what to expect when this happens. Now, I'm not going to state whether or not son did anything wrong. All I know is that mom and daughters hired a lawyer to basically remove son and to accuse him of all sorts of breaches of his duty to them and to the estate, largely due to a lack of communication. And that lack of communication could be largely due to a lack of understanding as to what that role entails. So that's a huge landmine because, A, who wants there to be a public document in the court records that has the transcripts of a case where you've sued your own child or either your sibling because of the role that they've done with your estate? Nobody wants that, And so no matter how, and we think that we've got a amicable resolution to this, but even if it is, there's damage that could be irreversible from a trust standpoint. So things like that, where you are stepping into an official role, a legal role, where you've got a very high level of accountability to your actions and you don't understand that accountability, you don't really get it, you're not a professional, you were not trained on how to do this, nobody prepared you. Things like that can really get you into hot water if you step into it unaware. So that's probably the biggest example of a landmine I can think of. There's others, let's just say, where you're maybe the same situation, but it wasn't a death that occurred. You're stepping in as a power of attorney, taking over mom and dad's money while they're still living. They've just now become incapacitated, and you owe your duty to mom and dad. It's not the same duty to communicate with the siblings as it was under a will, but nevertheless could still create suspicion of, and if there is already suspicion, believe me, every action you take is going to be looked at under a magnifying glass. What are you doing? Why did you make this decision? How come you didn't send them to a cheaper place? All of that. So those are the situations that can really be big landmines.
Wow. So like with anything, just communication. Communication solves so many problems there. But
Look,
again, people don't want to talk about this.
You can look at the transcript of everything from divorce court records to the way of to a business breaking up to these types of things. And at the root of all of the pointing fingers, usually it's poor communication.
Yep, absolutely. In your financial caregiving program, you talk about the 4 Ps. That these are kind of the pillars of this whole planning and really the education behind it all. And so let's talk about those. What you've got is it, tell me about the 4 Ps. What are they here?
All right, the 4 Ps is when you just break it down into what are the realms of responsibility that a financial caregiver has. What do they touch? What do they need to know about mom and dad's financial life? And I've kind of broken it down into the 4 Ps because it's kind of just flows easier. So the 4 Ps are people, property, programs, and plans. Those are the things that if you're stepping into the role of a financial caregiver, you need to have an awareness of if you're going to do it effectively. So let's talk about the first P, people. You need to know about the important people in your parents' lives that may have some influence or impact on the decisions that you make financially.
Mm-hmm.
And there's
Like who might those be?
typically,
Who are a few of those people?
all right. So let's just break those down into 3 groups: the family and relatives, professional advisors, and your medical people, that doctors and people they see medically. So in the family and relatives, well, why do I need to know about that? Well, if mom or dad dies and you've got to know, let's say that your mom, and like in my case, my stepfather had children from a prior marriage. Well, I need to know how to reach them, because if their estate documents provide anything for them, then I need to know how to reach the children of my stepdad's child. Or it could be a nephew or somebody you've not met or never even met before. So it's a good time, it's a good practice at that time to put that family tree together that you've always wanted to do anyway, and have a means of contacting those people. Under professional advisors, that's really key. And it's everything from their clergy, if they're a member of an active church or synagogue, to who their lawyer is, their CPA and accountant, because you're going to need to lean on those people for information if you're in an official capacity. And then the medical professionals, well, that goes without saying. You might have 12 specialists that you're dealing with if you're a medical power of attorney for your parents. And you've got to know something about the medication that one doctor gives. You need to know if mom has a reaction against it. You need to be able to call the internist. You've got to be able to deal with those people, and they need to know that they've got permission to deal with you. So they've got to have all the HIPAA disclosures in place and all of that, to where you can properly get the information to and from those professionals. So that's people, and that's a bigger task than it might otherwise see. Property, wow, that opens up everything from everything mom and dad own to what they owe and what they are owed by others. And not just a financial accounting for it, but also where's the evidence of the ownership? If they say they've got a property in Florida somewhere, well, where's the deed? You're going to need to know where that deed is.
Right.
And you're also going to need to know how it's titled. Did they own it joint tenancy? Did they own it in one name only? Is it in some type of a tenancy in common? How did they actually hold title to that property? Because your ability to conduct business on behalf of that property depends on those issues.
I'm hearing horror stories now about whether it's property or accounts or things being frozen. And, meanwhile, the children, the estate, the family, they have stuff they have to take care of, and things are tied up because none of this was discussed or taken care of. And we're not, and here's the thing I think is really important. Okay. We're not talking about you don't have to have a gazillion dollars. This isn't the people who are just completely low. I mean, look, if mom or dad had a $50,000 house in Kentucky, you still have to deal with this stuff. And I think that's
Oh yeah.
important too.
Yeah, absolutely. This does not discriminate on wealth. Those make the headlines, and
Sure.
we see them on the news reports, but this is everyday people. These are people with modest estates. These are not people that have several zeros after their net worth. This is just regular folks. They inherited some property from an aunt, from an out of state relative, and they never even bothered to go and change title to it, well, that's going to be a problem when
Right.
it comes to you administering that property. So there's a lot to that. And if they have a financial team in place, like an accountant or a lawyer, that will help. It will certainly help to have those people on your team, because if not, you're likely going to need to assemble that team to help you do it, do the best job. And
What
so the
about
move from, go ahead.
No, no, no. I was gonna ask you, what about programs and plans? What about the others
Yeah.
there?
So programs, no matter what you think about government programs, you love them, hate them, or indifferent, every American's going to be touched by them. They're going to be either touched by Medicare or Medicaid or veterans benefits, Social Security. Everybody's going to be touched by one or more government programs. And so knowing the ones that your parents benefit from, knowing why they benefit from it. Do they benefit as a widow or widower? Do they benefit for it as a claimant within Social Security, for example? Do they benefit because they're a veteran? Do they benefit because they have very little assets and so they're on Medicaid or SSI? So knowing not only what they benefit from, but why and who to contact and how to administer those programs, and at least be versant on. I mean, you don't have to become a Social Security or Medicare expert. God knows who can. I mean, it's like a labyrinth of confusion for most people, but being versant in the glossary, knowing kind of what things mean, is important. And so my program walks students through these three areas. And then finally, we get on plans, and we break down plans into plans for incapacity, plans for end of life decisions, funeral and memorial plans, and then finally plans for the distribution of the estate. How are you going to slice the pie? And are those plans in place? And hopefully your parents have put some of those plans in place during their lifetime. And if you're able to get them to do them because they've got capacity to do so, all the better. If they've not made those plans, then you need to know, well, gee, what does this mean? What then do I need to pick up to make sure there's at least some stand-in plan that can stand in the place of what they didn't do?
It's a lot of moving parts. And unfortunately, we don't think about these, or we don't, and no one's expected to know any of this. I mean, I think that's important to say, that it doesn't matter how much money or how little money you have. No one's expected to know all of these things, because you're living your life. You're doing it. But unfortunately, it comes to that 911, oh crap moment, when we've got to face this, and it becomes a baptism by fire, an education on the fly, and you miss a lot of things, and you miss a lot of opportunities, and it can be a costly and painful thing, financially and emotionally, for a lot of people.
And unfortunately, I've had too many people say, some of whom had significant wealth, um, I'm not going to worry about that. That's their problem. I'm going to be dead. Well, and I try to say, that's a pretty selfish position to
Yeah,
take.
it's a
One of
funny
the most,
funny line that isn't very funny in reality, is it?
yeah. And the truth of the matter is, one of the most unselfish things you can do for your family is to make sure they don't wind up in this clamoring role of wondering, what do I do? And to help them be prepared, for that moment. And the other reason is maybe it could be, if you want to couch it in selfish reasons, is that you're not, who's to say you're going to just be fine and be completely making all your decisions, and then the next day you're going to die? You may have this period in between where your inability to prepare your family does more harm to you than to them. So even if it's from a selfish standpoint, do it because of that, because of the improving your life and your quality of life during the time where you are still living, in between now and death, because that could be a while.
I think that's something important too, that, we're talking a lot about the caregiver themselves, about the adult child, who's, really has to deal with the fallout, or the wake, or the in process. But this is something that a senior could actually do as well, because it's important for them to know these things, but also to present to their adult child. Say, hey, because it is, I mean, look, being selfish there. Look, I need to get this together, and you guys need to get your act together, and I want to help you do that. That's it plays both sides.
It does. And here's the thing: while we talk a lot about the sandwich generation being the 50 somethings, or maybe the 50s to early 60s, I'm certainly in it. I'm in a club sandwich because I've got grandchildren, children, and a mom, two parents who are still well, a mother-in-law and a mother. So I feel like I'm in the club sandwich, but I have to realize that I'm on deck as well. So this applies to me looking down the chain of my family tree, not just up it. And the truth of the matter is, and I remember this hit me a few years ago when I was visiting mom at her retirement community where she lived for lunch. And I met one of her friends. She was in her, I don't know, early to mid 70s. So we tend to think that's the generation of the audience we're talking to now, right? Or that's the parent generation of the audience we're addressing right now, you and me on this podcast. Well, this person looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, I can't stay for lunch. I'd love to join you. I've got to go do something for mom." Now, this person was in their mid 70s and she was needing to go do something for mom. So my point is that we're going to be looking down the chain of our role in this as well as up it for a lot longer than we think. Yeah, some of the audience here, they're already facing caregiving decisions or moments when their parents are maybe they're in their early 70s or mid 70s, but the likelihood is greater that you're going to be, and I'm looking at your podcast watcher, viewer here, you're going to be in your late 60s, perhaps before you even start caregiving. Now let that sink in.
Oh, absolutely.
So
everybody's living longer. It's all
think about
longevity.
stepping into
So
it when
you
you're
bet.
that age. It is, and you had visions of Tuscany, and going on mud baths in Rome, when you might be staying at home having to take care of an 85 or a 90-year-old parent.
Tell me a little bit about the Financial Caregiver Academy and how it works and how someone can get a hold of this type of education.
Yeah, so the quickest answer is just go to wealthandhonor.com. You can then click the tab for Financial Caregiver Academy, and there's a description there of we've got two courses. One is the full course, full academy course is 20 lessons. It's about 5 hours of video. Each lesson is about 15, 20 minutes. Try to keep it short. Try to just not require the student to bite off more than they can chew. They're video lessons. We've got an ability to interact as a community, as well as to do a Q&A type of process. That's for those who really want to do a deep dive and take advantage of the full course offering. I realize that not everybody's got that time, and they just need a crash course. So I've also got a 145-minute crash course that discusses specifically the 4 Ps of financial caregiving. And then it comes with a guidebook, gives more information on that as well. So there's two ways to take advantage of that. That course is designed to help you come away with at least a minimum level of awareness of what you need to know. And that's why we created the community, because not only can you learn from me or other experts that we bring on for webinars and other types of services, but you can also learn from one another and support one another as well.
Right. And that's just it. People can go to for a crash course, but also an ongoing reference. You got a community, you have access to experts and other information. And I think that's the important thing. This is something that is truly an education tool for people who are living it and going through it. It's not some, oh, well, great, now get my plans and work with me as an advisor or anything. This is a true labor of love. And that's what I love so much about this is it was done coming from the right place because you need it and you see the value and how other people are hurting. And this can help a lot of folks.
Yeah. And because I realized, look, if I fell into this after 30 years of doing it professionally and found myself kind of in an unknown territory, what about just the average person? That's a cliff fall for them. So you're right. There is no upsell. Now that you've done this, why don't we invest your money? There's no insurance sale. After the fact, no one's going to call you to sell your insurance, Medicare supplement or Medicare Advantage plans or, anything like that. It is a purely educational tool.
I love that. And I think that's important because we're in such a day and age now where, look, if I think something's interesting, I want to learn more about, give them my email, they give me a teaser and then put me on this 30 email funnel of death here to try and sell me on something else. And I hate that.
You scroll down 3/4 of a mile down into the website and you find out, oh, this is actually going to end up costing me, $2,000 or whatever it is. So I wanted to keep it simple, straightforward. transparent. You don't like it, you refund your money.
It's not even a couple $100, is it, for this?
Right, right. It's worth 10 times that. And we'll do some group coaching, Q&A sessions.
Like, I've done a lot of coaching myself, and I think that's the biggest thing is you can learn something that is the overarching concept, but we all want to be seen, heard, acknowledged, and we have a personal issue. And how can I apply this in my life? What's it mean to me? And I think you do a great job with that. What are you most excited about right now?
I think it's that age really doesn't have to define what we do anymore. You know, in spite of the existence of ageism out there, the truth of the matter is there are forces that really make it better to be an older and vibrant person now than ever, because there's a global shortage of talent. And so it is now the time to assert your value and your relevance if you are an older person, and just refuse to let any type of ageist thought tell you what you can or cannot do. So I'm excited about still being relevant. I mean, yes, we have to stay on top of trends. Yes, I mean, I spend a lot of time staying on top of AI and the tools for AI, and realizing that it is here. Accept it. It's not going away. I could complain against it as an old curmudgeon, or I could decide I'm going to maximize the use of it to my benefit, even as someone who's now in their mid-60s. I'm excited at that.
That's the right approach. You know, I think it's funny, and I love how you say that we got a lot of gas in the tank. We're in the third quarter. If people are saying, "Oh, you have time, we're going to live to 100," I don't know about 100, but you know what? I'm in the third quarter here. There's still some time on the clock here, and I think that we've got a lot to do and a lot of living to happen. It's good.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not being in denial, I don't think, by saying that those who are in their 60s have a lot to look forward to in terms of their contribution and their relevance. So that's exciting.
There were several stories that came out in the past couple of months here in the States and in the UK as well. They surveyed a number of recruiters and HR people and corporate leaders. And I mean, almost 70% found that, or said that 57 is the age they feel is too old to work. And almost 40% of employers and corporate leaders have some sort of bias, stated bias against a person over the age of 50 when hiring them. And I just think, I look at that and go, are you kidding me? One, you're just missing out on so much talent and so much, brain power and so many things. But what I've found is there's some interesting companies out there. There's a group of former advertising execs that really got aged out, were kind of forced out of the industry. And they had started their own ad agency called Geezer. Love it. And they are hiring all of these 50 plus executives who still are just kicking ass and have all this wealth and knowledge to give, and are really working with a lot of companies. And I think you're going to find that, we're ignored, but there are a lot of opportunities. We just have to change. They don't look like they used to, and we have to adapt and adapt to it and move into it. So you got a time machine, and you're going to get to go back 30 years or so. You get to spend the afternoon having coffee with yourself. What would you tell your younger self over coffee about this stage of life? What advice would you give them?
This is interesting you bring this up. One of my most popular blog posts, you remember that app that came out 2-3 years ago? Well, more than that, probably 5 or 6 years ago, called Face App. And it allowed you to, they're a dime a dozen now, but it allowed you to age progress yourself to a future age where you can see what you might look like when you're older. Yeah. So I did that, and it was like staring in the face of my older me. And it was it's kind of an existential moment. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to kind of play this out. And I posted the blog post is titled Conversations with My Older Me. And I just reposted it again, I think last Christmas, but it was conversations with the older version of myself, asking the older version of myself how they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I posted in this hypothetical conversation to myself was, so is there any nuggets of wisdom you would like to tell me? Now, my response to myself was, well, there are, but it doesn't matter because you won't listen to me anyway. And so you might as well, I said, and it said to my younger self, there is no shortcut to wisdom. And so and I responded, you mean there's no blue pill, there's no plugging myself into the matrix
Right.
and just getting wisdom? No, you got to live it. And so the point I make is that even if I could have that conversation with my older me, there's a lot that I've got to experience. So going back in time to talk with my 30-year-old self, what would I have said? I think I would have said a lot of things about loosening up, particularly as it related to raising kids, of they're going to be okay, and 90% of the way they'll determine to be okay won't have a whole lot to do with you. So the part that does have to do with you, just focus on loving them and letting them become the version of themselves that they were meant to be, instead of trying to direct their outcome so much. And, instead of trying to be their engine, just be a rudder, and a small one at that. And I think that's probably what would have told myself 30 years ago.
That's really good stuff. That's smart stuff there. I love it. Dave Russell, good man doing good work. Thanks for being on Advanced Adulting.